In the world of online discourse, you're either 100% on one side or 100% on the other. The algorithm always reinforces what you already know. But what does the other side think? And what's really going on under the surface? The lines have been drawn, the sides have been chosen, this is the good, the bad and the optics. The latest game from IOI Interactive has launched, 007 First Light, and as expected, the internet is awash with commentary that it's really good, as well as others saying it looks and plays like a cheap PS2 game, or that it's an industry plant filled to the brim with wokeness. So what's the objective truth behind these claims, and how does my experience playing it marry up to those comments? On GBO, my intention is to find the moderation within the extremes, so let's get into it. As always, we crack on with discussing the gameplay first, and address the elephant in the room. How similar is this game to IOI's beloved Hitman series? It's a tough one to answer. The developers have highlighted in interviews during the marketing of First Light that players should not go in expecting a Bond-themed Hitman. Their approach to this game was very different. And for the most part it is. It's more action-focused, being bombastic is a goal rather than a failure state, and the story flows through the much more linear level beats in a clearer way than the looser framing of the Hitman games. That said, there were times playing this game that I felt such a sense of familiarity I actually wanted to switch it off and go back to playing Hitman, and I have played a lot of Hitman. In this Eurogamer article, narrative director Marin Emborg said that they were happy to see all the It's Not a Hitman Game articles being published after previews, and combat designer Tom Marcham mentions First Light has some inspiration and a few mechanics, but it's more a Bond game. I think they're downplaying it a little bit here. First Light is essentially a light version of a Hitman game right up until you get spotted or enter combat. Then it moves away from the, well that's my one screwed up approach in Hitman, to sick, let's punch or shoot people. Otherwise it is very similar. If we look at that first publicised mission where you and some colleagues infiltrate a fancy hotel hosting a chess championship, it plays almost exactly like a Hitman game. During my run I clambered up drain pipes to go through windows, I put on different hats to disguise myself, I had to avoid those white dotted enforcers who see through disguises, and I came across NPCs talking about key ways of getting into restricted areas that popped into my journal as an opportunity to exploit. And just to be clear, I'm not complaining about this. The Hitman games are superb and I have sunk a lot of hours into them, so I'm perfectly fine with them riffing off those mechanics, even if they do feel a little more sparse and pared down than their inspiration. It was only when I messed up and got spotted that the difference becomes apparent. In Hitman this would lead to a very cheeky quick reload, whereas in Bond you just sort of deal with it. In fact, it has a mechanic where if you can take care of the people quickly, no alert goes out and the words "situation contained" appear at the top of the screen. This is a very Bond-like system where you can silence the small group who discovered you and nobody else is any the wiser. I suppose it's sort of similar to the unconscious witness system where if you plonk them in a wardrobe or box the issue disappears, but it doesn't penalise you for this the way that Hitman does. If anything, the stealth is sort of built around occasionally being spotted and having to deal with it. Along those lines, I also liked a very Bond-like feature called the bluff mechanic. Sometimes you accidentally get spotted, but thankfully the charmer that Bond is, you can come out with some dumb lie that the guards believe and your butt is saved. Each of these actions costs a number of these little lightning bolt charges that you build up by making stealth takedowns and such, which I don't actually remember the game ever explaining to me, you just sort of eventually notice that's how it works. Then of course, later in the level, and no spoilers here as this was part of the publicity campaign, the mission escalates into a car chase before then becoming a gunfight on an airfield runway. This is where the Bondness of the game starts to shine, though I would say that the car controls can be a little stiff. When you're not going straight forward, you basically get given a normal corner or a sharp corner, where it's clear which one requires a handbrake turn and which doesn't, which makes it feel more like a horizontal Flappy Bird than Forza Horizon. As for the gunplay, it's a fairly standard cover shooter affair, and I need to emphasise the cover aspect. If you're going from cover to cover, the combat is easy peasy and you can just keep hopping out to take out baddies. If you decide to run and gun it, you will be mowed down immediately. The game also really dives into the James Bond action of it all. Plenty of opportunities to blow stuff up and take out a group of guys. I also love the ammo mechanic. As you would realistically expect, Bond doesn't have a lot of ammo for his service pistol. You can pick it up from enemies you've taken out or disarmed, but the most fun you can have with an empty gun is to throw it at the enemy, which distracts them enough for you to dash forward, disarm them with a quick knockout, and then use their gun to carry on the fight. Again, it's all very, very actiony. One thing that is prevalent throughout each section, whether it's stealth, driving or combat, is how difficult to fail the game is. I will mention this more in the directions section later, but the game is very generous with mistakes. On top of the whole situation contained and bluff mechanics, there were also a couple of times in stealth where I moved out of cover without noticing an enemy was right there, and the game sort of put me back behind cover again. It was a nice touch, and Hitman would have gone to town on me for making a mistake like that. Similar to the car segments, I bashed up that car on my first chase quite badly, but it still just ticked along as normal, even though the rear bumper was scraping along the road behind me. It's a very forgiving game, something some people might not be in favour of, but I suppose it fits with the vibe that they're going for. And as I mentioned, so long as you remember to stick to cover and use the gadgets available to you, combat is also pretty straightforward. Speaking of the gadgets, I won't spoil them beyond what's been shown already, but you have a limited loadout for each mission of what you can take with you, and they can be used in combat, as distractions, to encourage stealth takedowns, or to bypass environmental blockers like locked doors. They fall into the category of electric or chemical, which use meters that can be topped up with items quite generously dotted around each level. The story, as again has been well publicised, is about a young Bond and how he earned the 007 numbers. The premise of the story is a bit weak. Even though MI6 has acquired a quantum computer somehow, M wants to reopen the 007 program for some reason, even though it was previously shut down because of something, and the hunt begins for a rogue 00 agent who went rogue somehow for some reason and is now getting in touch about something that threatens the world. A lot of this stuff does eventually get explained, and I get that with a spy thriller you need to have an element of mystery and an unravelling of the truth as things go along. But in the early hours of the game, the story basically says just go with it, and a lot of explanations for things are hand waved off with "we are secretive" or "that's what we want you to think," which does get a little bit frustrating. However, the payoff in the end is great when things finally start coming together, and I definitely feel like IOI wrote themselves a great Bond story here. The characters are really what make the story shine, each one individual with some terrific voice acting and personalities. Some take a little warming up to, but the way the tutorial mission presents as a training montage really helps elevate the relationships and dynamics between them. And I do have to point out, that tutorial mission is probably one of the most well-paced, best framed and narratively purposeful tutorials I think I've ever played in a video game. Visually, the game's really good looking. The environments are incredibly detailed and polished, though there are some textures that seem to be very low res compared to the majority. Most of it isn't that noticeable or awkward, but occasionally a cutscene will take place in front of one, and that can look a little jarring. It has to be said that for a linear, story-driven game, there are some massive environments to get lost in. Even the tutorial mission in the MI6 training base on Malta, there are these little secrets around the map. But again, the Hitman similarities are striking. After that initial tutorial, the first two missions I went on were infiltrating a nightclub that was very reminiscent of Berlin, and then infiltrating a hotel with a big event on, essentially the Paris level with a hint of Bangkok. Again, not complaining, because IOI always does an incredible job with their level design, but going back to my issue that at times this seems like a pared down version of Hitman, the levels just feel like they lack content compared to their very similar counterparts. One thing about the environments that is amazing though is the physics and interactivity when it comes to combat. Getting into a fistfight with somebody is great, because it seems like every piece of the room you're in can be interacted with. Throw a guy into a shelf and you'll see the shelf topple over. Get punched and stagger into a glass display case, the glass will break. It's not a foolproof system. In some levels there are thin wooden walls that you can kick apart to distract enemies or find shortcuts, but I threw a guy into one and it didn't do anything. But generally it is an awesome touch. One thing to highlight is the animations. Again, going back to the "it's not a Hitman game," it sure does look like it. Climbing pipes and edging across ledges looks the same. The detective vision, called Q vision in this game, looks very similar to Hitman. Even poisoning enemies with the smartphone gadget makes them look and react almost exactly the same way as the poison mechanic in Hitman. That said, Bond does have a bit more swagger than 47, as you would expect, so while there are some similarities that make me feel like animations were just lifted from one game to the next, they clearly have animated 007 to show his character more than being a stiff assassin like IOI's mascot is. And of course, the new mechanics that aren't lifted from Hitman all have very solid animations themselves, like Bond's variety of takedown options and the very brutal, weighty melee combat system. The only other graphical thing to point out is the characters, and there is a very clear disconnect between the main characters, the side characters and the NPCs. Main characters, especially those modelled after the real actors, look superb, capturing subtle facial animations, somewhat realistic skin and highly detailed clothes. Hair is a little fuzzy in places, but it's a decent job, though not best of the best. The side characters are a little less detailed. For instance, some of the named workers in QLab that have a distinctly unique look but not to the same level of detail. And the NPCs fall under the trap of having those plasticky default avatar appearances. This isn't a slight against IOI. Pretty much all of the industry does it, and why wouldn't you? There's so many NPCs in this game it would be nuts to model each one individually. But it is a little jarring when a very detailed James Bond is speaking with a very generic and minimally polished MI6 worker. Audio wise, the sound design is excellent, and while the game does try to mirror the look and style of a Hollywood movie, thankfully it doesn't mirror the piss poor sound mixing where you have to turn up for dialogue and turn down for action. NPC chatter and dynamic sound works excellently, a holdover from how well implemented it was in Hitman. The cars growl as they should, tyres squeaking, punches land with a satisfying and realistic thwack, the guns crack as you'd expect, and the explosions are explosion-y. Musically it sounds great as well. Again, there is a lot of inspiration from the Hitman series, though since it's the same composer I'm not surprised. But interweaved in that is the subtle hints of the Bond theme, building ever so slightly as the game progresses. And I do like that they didn't immediately jump in with the theme early on in the game. This is of course a Bond earning the 007 moniker, so it's nice to see the theme song slowly becoming what it should be while we see Bond doing the same. Having played the game on PC, one of the initial issues I found was that just booting the game up can be a struggle, though this does seem to have been patched now. The game otherwise seems to run quite well, loading times are decently quick, and I didn't notice any major frame rate drops even in some of the more graphically heavy sections of the game. I did spot a few instances of pop-in and some where performing some actions, especially when using takedowns behind cover, led to some weird physics glitches, but this only seemed to be during the action and it settled down once the animation finished playing. It should also be noted that I initially played using a mouse and keyboard and soon gave up in favour of a controller. The keyboard controls aren't as bad as Launch Day Crimson Desert, I don't think any game can be, but there are some weird choices in there. For example, interacting with objects uses F, unless you want to interact with a throwable object during combat, in which case you have to stretch across to G, limiting your movement options. Also, it's very hard to use precise movement and your gadgets at the same time, because you have to hold Alt to bring up Q vision and then use the 1 to 4 number keys to select the gadget you want. I don't know why some modern developers have this idea that because a keyboard has loads of keys they need to try and assign every single one to a different action, but in the end I gave up and switched to a controller outside of gunfights. One of the things to consider when it comes to the direction of the game is replayability. I know it's unfair to keep banging on about Hitman, as I've mentioned already, the developers have specifically pointed out that it's a totally different game and you shouldn't go into it expecting a Hitman game with a Bond facelift. But there are so many similarities that it's hard not to make comparisons sometimes, and where replayability is concerned, I didn't feel like I needed to play First Light more than once. Sure, they have included challenges for each level to try and entice you to do different playstyles, which has clearly been influenced by the similar challenges you get in Hitman games. And they have the TAC-Sim segments that are essentially a challenge mode that remixes the levels, sort of a blend between Hitman's Contracts mode and the challenge mode in the Arkham series, as well as having a section called Escalations just like in Hitman. The issue is that the Hitman levels are all massive sandboxes that have been carefully crafted to be exploited by littering them with disguises, tools, weapons and so on. Your first run will be a messy hour-long endurance test of mistakes and discoveries. You'll probably follow the guiding hand of the opportunity system incredibly closely, but eventually you'll cotton on to the fact that if you walk diagonally across this corridor at the right time, the guards will be facing away, the target will be about to drink the wine you've just poisoned discreetly using a rat poison behind the bin you started next to, and you can get to the exit within 90 seconds. That isn't the case with First Light, even though there are moments it presents as such. If I refer back to that hotel mission from the marketing, there are clear alternate ways you can try and get into the party, but they all lead to the same converging narrative, and there's no point where you figure out, oh actually if I time this right, I don't need to do any of this stuff, I can just walk right in. So it presents itself very similar to Hitman in that it looks like there are multiple ways to approach a problem, but in the end it just feels like set dressing. You're following the story regardless, it's just a matter of how you spend the prior 10 minutes getting there. Then of course your gadgets are limited to a few and there's no stuff you can find in the level to mix things up. That being said, sometimes comparing the game to Hitman is favourable. The dev team have said in interviews previously that they couldn't make a Bond style Hitman game because the whole idea behind the latter is that Agent 47 is trying to be as discreet as possible. He's a ghost, whereas Bond is meant to be an action hero. So instead the game is filled with spectacle. The artistic decisions, the bombastic set pieces, the car chases, the attempts to balance the look and style of a Bond film with the interactivity of a proper action game. IOI have clearly gone all out to make this game look like a summer action blockbuster, and it really works. I've seen the usual suspects online complaining about things such as how hard it is to actually die in this game, but that's just part of the direction. Is it hard to die? Yeah, but then how many Bond movies have you seen where 007 was in a situation that should have gotten him killed, but somehow he scraped through it? Basically all of them. A more acceptable comparison for this game has been the Uncharted series, and there are clear similarities between the two, but the question has to be asked, so what? If a game is influenced by or shares similar gameplay beats to another, these days for some reason that is a bad thing. Do the Red Dead Redemption games suck because under the cowboy surface they just play like carless versions of Grand Theft Auto? Do you hate Elden Ring because it's just an open world Dark Souls? Expedition 33 uses turn-based mechanics that have been used in games for decades, so I guess we'd better take all those awards back. It seems like the people that complain this game's basically the same as this other game only roll out that argument when it's about a game they've already decided they want to hate. If a gameplay system or approach works well, why wouldn't you want it in other games? The Uncharted series is one of the most beloved and acclaimed franchises of the 21st century, but if another game reminds you of it, suddenly it's bad? That's absolutely baffling. I'll admit maybe I went too big too soon with using Mixtape as the first video in this series. Comparatively, First Light does not have such a looming controversy surrounding it. That being said, there are some external factors that may still influence your decision to try it out. Mainly you have the grifters that are making these points. I mentioned them earlier, the ones who are decrying this as a terrible game because it shares similarities to Uncharted. Or they'll say things like, this game looks like a PS2 game, and point to things like a random, completely innocuous low-res pile of logs that, in the context of the level, is supposed to be run past immediately. Also, the PS2 is the most beloved console of all time, and I've seen a lot of people disenfranchised by modern gaming say they wish they could go back to that time, so I don't think that's the insult you think it is. There are legitimate issues you might have with this game. I've mentioned some myself already, criticisms that either impact your enjoyment of playing the game or seem to contradict what the marketing says. Those are the things you should look out for. Does it spoil the fun, or were you lied to? There are games that fully deserve all of the hate they get. This isn't one of them. The only other external factor I've really seen for this game is how woke it is. Now this is a contentious issue in not just the gaming industry but the entertainment complex as a whole, and unfortunately again apparently you're either one extreme or the other. I am planning on doing a video about the real issues with inclusivity in the media at some point, though I'm realistically waiting for the next big controversy so I can make it timely. But the thing is, where potential wokeness is concerned, there's no problems with this game and it doesn't impact anything. The biggest argument seemed to be that Moneypenny is black and M is Indian. That's it. A government agency based in London, a city with a large population of black and Indian people, and apparently it's a surprise that two of them would work there. It can't be because they're women. Moneypenny was always a woman, and while M started as a man, I don't think there are many Bond fans who wouldn't rate Judi Dench as the quintessential portrayal of the character. Also, I've seen less complaints about the fact that the hardened old spy trainer played by Lenny James is black as well, but maybe that's because it's Lenny freaking James and he's an icon. icon. Speaking of icons, Bond fans don't give a toss about ethnicity. For years, even though sadly he might be too old at this point, fans have desperately wanted Idris Elba to be attached to the role. Not just because he's a fantastic actor, but he possesses all the right qualities. He's cool, suave, charming, confident, and damn good looking. And the fact that he's also black doesn't matter in the slightest. Also, there's no way this game can be woke because most of the women in it are pretty attractive. Moneypenny, Cressida, Charlotte Roth, a couple of the nerdy girls in QLab. Hell, I bet even some folks wouldn't mind seeing Ponsonby put that desk to better usage. Do you think this hottie would be in the game if Sweet Baby Inc had their hands all over it? Anyway, that's it. 007 First Light has some good points, some bad points, and some external influences just like every other game. Except I feel the scales are definitely tipped in favour of good points this time around. While it certainly wears influences on its sleeves, and some of those influences are arguably better games, that doesn't make this one a bad game. There are some issues I have with the game, but overall I enjoyed my time with it. It's not a perfect 10, it's not a near perfect 9, but for what it is and what you should expect, I'd say 8 is a fair score. Right, that's me done now. Off you pop.